Hi OAC community, I'm Kendall, and thank you for tuning in to Fresh Perspectives. On this episode, we'll speak with Jaime Fivecoat. Jaime is a founding chair of the OAC. She is an active and passionate advocate for the treatment of obesity and related issues, including putting an end to weight bias. She is also an active LGBTQ plus advocate. Today, we're going to speak about how these two social issues intersect. Welcome, Jaime, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about spending a little bit of time with you and chatting about these issues.
Absolutely. So to start out, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Oh yeah. So my journey's been quite long. So it started off actually before the OAC came into being, and in 2003 I had the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery, and my surgeon was good friends with the policy manager at Ethicon Endosurgery, and she had come to him and said, do you have anybody who's in business that's had the surgery and could possibly talk to other people? And so that kind of got me started on this whole process of being an advocate. They asked me to join them and their policy team to go around the country and talk to employers and to bariatric surgeons about the coverage of bariatric surgery. Then in 2005, Joe and I met up. It was the first, Joe Naglowski, and it was his first meeting that he had made a presentation at. We were both presenting down in Florida, and I signed up that night for the Obesity Action Coalition. After he talked, I was member number 6, and from there on, got onto the board and became the first chair, and then it's been a fantastic and passionate journey for me ever since.
Wow, Jaime, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, how has your advocacy for obesity and LGBTQ plus issues intersected?
Yeah, intersect is a really good word because a very popular concept that's out right now is intersectionality. And what it really boils down to, that all forms of marginalization come into play, and as when we deal with one, we're actually kind of dealing with all of them. And so for me, the intersection has come very strongly, particularly in the last few years after I retired. I started speaking an awful lot at universities and at medical schools and a number of other venues, and I always talk about 3 subjects. I talk about weight, of course, and obesity, and I talk about addiction, and I talk about LGBTQ issues. And what's it's interesting, but it's also very sad, is that the LGBTQ community tends to have higher rates of a number of things, but particularly have higher rates of obesity, have higher rates of addiction issues. Addiction and obesity frequently are tied close together, and depending on what folks are addicted to, and then and suicide. And a lot of the suicide comes from an issue that we deal with very, very much in the weight loss community, and that's body image, self-image, and self-stigmatization. So a lot of what we talk about in advocacy in the obesity community transfers and applies to the other areas that I do a lot of advocacy for, because everybody in those communities are dealing with a lot of self-stigmatization and a lot of negative self-talk, and that affects our success in losing weight. It affects our success in living our lives fully and authentically as we can. So the intersection is integrated more than just intersecting. It's all, at least in my way of thinking, it's all together. And so when I'm working on one, I'm working on the other.
Now, can you talk a little bit about how having obesity might affect access to gender-affirming care and vice versa?
it has an effect. Having obesity does have an effect on receiving care in a lot of areas, and so when it came to gender affirming care, there were actually before you can have gender affirming surgery, they want you down to certain weights, and the lower the weight, the better in their eyes, and so that's one aspect of it. But as you transition, what really comes more into play is not so much the LGBTQ aspect of it, but weight when it comes to gender issues. And so the more you're perceived as the gender that you live as, the more the actually gender discrimination comes into play, and so in many times when I particularly am dealing with a new provider, I always self-advocate and check things out, and I'm more likely to have issues wrapped up around gender biases rather than around LGBTQ biases until they really know who I am, and then all of them come into play. I call it stacked stigma, and so that we as humans do a really good job of marginalizing others, and we do it in lots of different ways. So the more of those things that you're marginalized with, such as obesity, such as being part of the LGBTQ community, plus such as being female, those things will have an effect, and they compound on each other.
Thank you, Jaime, again for sharing that. I think it's very interesting that you used the word stacked stigma, and it kind of leads me into my next question about the importance of understanding how race, gender, and sexual orientation intersect to affect the risk of obesity.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the LGBTQ community has higher rates of obesity than the general population. That also falls into people of color, and it plays out into how you're going to get and whether or not you're going to receive care. In many aspects, in even within the LGBTQ community, it depends on which part of the community you're in. But in some aspects of it, having a little bit of obesity is not bad because it hides some of your physical features that you're not comfortable with, and that's true for people who are non-binary. It's true for people who are trans men. It's true for people who are trans women. Obesity is also used in an addictive, springs out of an addiction to food within each of those communities because that's what we use to calm ourselves if we're not using particularly if we're not using other substances to do that with. But all in all, we know the statistics that are out there wrapped up around levels of obesity. It's the other thing that really comes into play, I think, in treating obesity within all the different communities is their willingness to even go to the doctor, and their willingness to seek treatment other than fad, what's out there in the social media and what's out there as fad diets or fad processes. And the treatment they receive when they go into a doctor's office is going to have a great effect on that. And so those folks, not just the physicians, but also the nursing staff, the folks that are going to check you in, the administrative staff, all that aspects of a doctor's office come into play and have an effect on whether or not we're going to seek treatment and we're going to have success with that treatment, more or less continue on with it over a longer period of time. I'm fortunate that I was an advocate, and because for me, as I quite frankly, in both weight and in LGBTQ issues, I find myself always educating. And so when I'm with my providers, one of the things I ask every single one of them, because I go to a practice where my primary care physicians are always residents. It's part of what I've chosen to do. And so I always inform them of the American Board of Obesity Medicine, ask them if they know about it, and encourage them to go out and take the study for it, and not necessarily that they need to become one of the fellows there, but to get certified with it so that they understand obesity. And I go to a practice that already has a lot of gender affirming care and who work specifically with folks like me. But even then, there's opportunities for training and for teaching. So it's that's what we as patients, I think, need to be able to do first, is self-advocate and understand their bodies and to understand their situation and their conditions, so that they can do as much as they can to help the medical staff and their medical team work with them.
That's amazing. Thanks, Jaime, again for sharing all of that. Now, is there anything additional that we as advocates can do to ensure equity in obesity care?
I think the biggest thing we can do as advocates is to advocate, is to be out there and to be present. It's interesting. I was at a meeting. It was actually a very intersectional meeting. It was a meeting of advocates from all the different types of advocating organizations around the Greenville area. And so the director of Black Lives Matter at the time, somebody asked the question, well, what is it we can do? And his response was amazing and perfect, I thought. He says, be present. What you can do is be there. What you can do is add your voice. What you can do is advocate for us as well as for yourselves. And I just thought that was, to me, that was so powerful. It was simple, and yet at the same time, it was, what can we do? And more times than not, it's to be present. Is when there are opportunities to join in, when there are opportunities to advocate really for any subject for folks that are marginalized, is to be there and at the same time be willing to talk about the stuff that you're passionate about, and because they all come together, and that gets back then to the concept of intersectionality, that and now I was thinking about it earlier this morning, and the name is the Anti-Defecation League. I think it's the name of the organization. But anyway, they have a commercial that's out, and I think it's national, about about bias towards the Jewish community. And they're right on. So when you fight for one, you're fighting for all, and that's true. So as we help our world reduce the marginalization that's going on out there, when we help our world, help them become more aware of their own intrinsic biases and to be more thoughtful and choiceful about how they utilize those biases, then then we will be able to affect our own abilities to get the treatment that we need and to be able to get the care that we need once we're in that treatment.
Absolutely. That is a very incredibly powerful advice that you gave. Be present, and when you fight for one, you fight for all. I think that's amazing advocacy advice. Very powerful. Well, thank you again for joining us today, Jaime. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this important topic.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to when we get together again in person.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it as well.